Hello and welcome to Films and Fandoms with Kaylee. Before I get into this episode, NAFCA wants to thank its sponsors, WISPA Systems, the electrical design build contractor for your 21st century home and business, and Dakota, the Du Bois Area Council on the Arts. I am back again with another episode, and this time I'm going to be talking about Moon Knight Episode 4. This episode was crazy, y'all. So the episode is called The Tomb, and a short summary is Marc and Steven must find a balance as supernatural threats head look to stop them. This episode was directed by Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead. The writers for this episode are Alex Meenehan. I think that's how you say that, and I apologize if I mispronounced that. Peter Cameron and Sabir Pirzada. Apologize if you can hear my fan. It is kind of hot here. So, alright, so let's get to this episode. And this episode, it was so good. And I can't wait to talk about it. So we open with this creepy upside down shot hallway shot, and like it turns right side up. And we see Osiris taking the Khonshu. I called it a statue, but after watching this episode, I realized it was a Ushapti. I don't know why I didn't make that connection sooner. That's what it is. And Osiris is taking the Khonshu Ushapti to a shelf with a candle behind it, and we see there are a lot more of these statues. We got the opening credits, and we see a beetle flying away as Layla is calling for Steven and trying to get him to wake up. And as Layla is trying to pull Steven to get him, I'm assuming back to the truck, headlights illuminate her and they get shot at by Harrow's men. And Layla pulls Steven and they go tumbling down a sand dune. And Layla leaves Steven and runs back to the truck, and she sneaks into the back. And I call it the gun truck because there's a massive gun on the truck. The gun truck is circling the truck, and the goons see Steven and they think he's dead. And Layla grabs a couple of flares because they're in the trunk. There's a bag that has a bunch of flares in it. So she stands outside the truck like a badass and lights the flare and is holding it to get the goons' attention. They go to turn around, and Layla hides behind the truck because she's getting shot at. And then the truck comes around and she's not there. So then Layla, she comes around the corner, lights the flare, throws it in a box of it looks like fireworks, so some type of explosives or fireworks, and takes out the truck. And this is when the camera's on Layla, and then it just pans over to Steven. He was now awake and alert. And Layla says, I need to go. So as they're driving, the sun's coming up. It's actually very beautiful. And it makes me kind of want to visit Cairo now. But traveling's not so good right now, so, and I can't afford it. So as they're driving, Layla says they can't lose any more time as Harrow's headed back to the tomb. And Layla tells Steven that they now need Marc. And Marc's in the side mirror saying she's right and that she gets it. Steven says no, and I was like, no? What do you mean no? And Steven reveals that he made a deal with Marc that when he was done with Khonshu, he would disappear for good. Marc says the deal did involve him getting Layla and them killed, and it wasn't going to fly with them. Layla questions that they made a deal that Marc would disappear from her life and says she should have been told about it. Marc has this... It kind of does have a seriously bitch face look at Steven. Steven's well, hadn't he disappeared from her life entirely already? And Layla agrees and says that the suit was Mark's best feature and he didn't have that anymore. Which, burn from Layla. And Mark tells Steven to give him the body as it's a suicide mission. And Layla continues on saying that she knows Mark and he'd want to lone wolf this whole thing. Which, as soon as I heard the lone wolf, I was like, are you freaking kidding me? Because if you remember in my leverage episode I did with Alex, not only were we talking about how Elliot is like a lone wolf, but what was funny is after, when we were messaging each other, we were looking at a clip of a song from a show, Almost Paradise, which might be one of the shows I will do, because I'm just rewatching it, and there's literally like a bit of a song called Lone Wolf, because it's one of the names of the episodes is Lone Wolf, and so it's just funny to me, like the coincidence of like hearing that phrase again after like what happened. After she says that, Layla insists that it's not going to happen and they're not going to do that. Steven says they aren't, and it's just them in the open road. Layla puts the brakes on and stops the Jeep and says they're going to go on foot. Steven agrees and they get out. Which, you actually get some cool music as we get a montage of them traveling to the tomb. And I must credit the sound department for this episode, because not only have they put in some like good music, like all throughout the series have they put on good like music and has a good soundtrack, but the sound effects, which I'm gonna get into here in a minute, because oh boy, does this episode do a 180. Alright, continuing on with the episode. So they find the tomb, and there's a bunch of like equipment and tents and that. And Layla says they have to find a different way to Amit. And they come across the camp, and Steven says hi to some camels, because he's adorable like that. And Layla suggests they go search for supplies. So Steven goes in a tent and looks at a glass table. Mark appears, saying Steven looks scared. Steven says he isn't. Mark says he should be, as without Khonshu, there's no more suit, no more healing, and no more power. Which does confirm one of my questions that I had asked from the last episode, is with Khonshu being, or with Khonshu gone, does Mark still have the suit? Or do Mark and Steven have their suits? And it seems to say no suit. So, and Steven says there's no more Mark, which is what he thought he said, but believe me, and then it comes out of his mouth, just shows what a plonker he is, because, Steven's English. Mark says he wishes he could disappear, but he's still here, and if Steven's going to do this, he has to be smart for Layla's sake, and he's been in situations like this before. Steven says so is he, and it's the same body, so he has muscle memory. But Mark says he isn't sure it works like that. So Steven goes to check out another part of the tent, and Mark says he's not alone. And Steven says he knows he is, and he's kind of snippy. And then he turns back and he's like, he is it because he's got Layla and she's got his back. And Mark is so pissed. I hear this, and he's like, what, you're in love? Like, you're in love with my wife? She's like, appreciate the concern, mate, but got her from here. And if I need like a recipe for a protein shake or something, I'll give you a call. As Mark's threatening that if Steven lays a finger on Layla, he's gonna throw both of them off a cliff. And then we see Layla's packing up some flares, and we get a shot of something with the ornate handle. Kind of looks like a bow handle, but Not sure, but it's partially buried in the sand. Then we see Layla putting on a harness on Steven, like one of those climbing harnesses that go around the nether regions, let's just say. And it is a bit charged. Steven says he feels like he's been waiting his whole life for this, then specifies the adventure. Layla stands up and is adjusting the harness, saying she knows, and we want what we can't have. And there's so much freaking tension here. Oh my god. Because she's adjusting like the part of the harness that's like in the waist. So she's like tightening it, and they're like almost touching the faces. And it's there's so much in that little moment. And then Layla is like you smell like it's like, of course you are, of course you do, like why wouldn't you? But and then she goes to kiss Steven, but Steven kind of pulls back, saying Mark's trying to protect her from Khonshu. She's like, what? And Steven explains that's why he's been pushing her away, and he thinks Khonshu wants her for his next avatar, and he wasn't gonna let that happen. And then apologizes, and Layla's kind of like upset about this, saying he felt like she should know. So then she like backs off and gets like gloves on, asking Steven why he's telling her this now. Steven says he doesn't know, he just thought she deserved to know. Layla says it wasn't Mark's call to make, and she doesn't need protection. What she wants is honesty. Which is interesting. And I'll bring up that point here in a minute. And Steven says he gets it. Layla points out that's more of a Steven thing. As Layla's tightening the part. This is the part where Steven's, or where Layla's tightening the part of the harness that's above the waist, and Steven's kind of getting flustered. Like, what? Being honesty. Layla's like, yeah, being honesty. And then Steven puts his hands on her shoulder. And like they kiss, and early he leads into her for a kiss, and they like touch foreheads. And it's kind of cute, but awkward, which makes total sense. I think that Layla, obviously, like Layla liked it, but I think she's like conflicted. And I also suspect that from that little like interaction with Layla saying that she wants honesty, she doesn't need protection. Because it's clear we see that like Layla can take care of herself in like a fight. But and you could tell that like from their fight in the arena, or Mark and Layla's fight in the arena in the last episode, that like they do like work well together, and they like have worked well together, or at least they have, like when it comes to like protecting each other. Like Layla is able to like cover Mark when he's taken down other people, and Mark's able to like protect Layla when she needs it. So what I'm kind of interested here, I'm kind of thinking here, is that Layla sees Steven as like the kind of man that she wished Mark had become, instead of being a kind of a distant, or instead of being distant and kind of an asshole. Which, I mean, there's good reason, because it's obvious like Mark does care about Layla. You know, Mark's like trying to tell Steven to like give over the body because he wants to like because he knows he could protect Layla, and like that's what he wants is to protect Layla. And like the whole time back at the apartment, Marc was telling Steven to like get her out of there and to like keep her out of it. So it's obvious, and I kind of touched on a bit in the last in episode 3, or when I talked about Moon Knight episode 3, but just having Marc be, or that it's clear that like they still love each other, but like this, the whole thing is they can't tell each other the truth, and they're only in a way they're kind of only honest when they're lying, which kind of sounds strange, and but that's not a dynamic that you often see. I mean, the only like dynamic I know is, and I'll kind of get into this as I talk more about leverage with Alex, but the idea that uh, Nate and Sophie are only honest with each other when they're lying, and how they like eventually moved past that. So I'm wondering if we're getting a similar situation here with Marc and Layla, because it's only when they're like, or not necessarily when they're, yeah, when they're lying is when they're being honest with each other in a way. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that plays out as we continue on. Alright, so continuing on with the episode. Layla kind of breaks the tension by saying she's going to go down first before she belays. Steven asks what belay is, and Layla attaches the rope to hers, saying she can't tell when he's stroking, and laughs, then goes down the tunnel. And I'm pretty sure belaying is just like lowering someone down? Or no. Wait. Well, actually, never mind. I don't know what belay is. And the kind of funny moment, and Marc, in the callback to the first episode when Marc takes control of Steven's body, Marc punches Steven. So, and probably in retaliation for kissing his wife. Because Steven did say, or, sorry, Marc said that if he laid a hand on Layla, he was going to throw them both off a cliff. And Steven laid more than a hand on Layla, so, yeah. Layla gets down gracefully, and she draws like a little thing in the sand as Steven comes crashing down. Probably because of Marc. And Layla asks if he's okay, and Steven says he's aces, and he wished she didn't see that, as Layla's taking his hardest off. And Steven says, "Look at you," when talking about a statue in the back, but Layla thinks he's talking about her, and then sees the statues, and is totally fanboying, and says if they sprung to life, and asked him for a riddle of passage. And asked him a riddle for passage, he'd be thrilled, but he'd also shit himself, but he'd be thrilled. And Layla gets a chuckle out of it. Oh, and back it up a bit after Steven says, "Look at you," and talking about the statues, and Layla thinks he's talking about her, and then she sees the statues saying they're like kind of flustered, and it's like, "Oh yeah, they're gorgeous. It's like they've been guarded for centuries." And that's when Steven fanboys. And then Steven sees the drawing Layla did. It looks like a line with like a backward E. I don't know the technical terms, but that's what it kind of looks like. And he asks if she drew it, and Layla says she did, and it's for her father, as he would have loved to be here. Steven asks if he's a big history buff, Layla says he was so much worse and he was an archaeologist on a mission, and they keep going. Layla tells Steven that as they're walking, Layla tells Steven that Layla tells Steven that it was a dream to him worth dying for, and he did. Steven apologizes, and Layla says it's fine, and it happens. Steven says he bets that her father would be positively beaming right now, seeing her standing and the proof of it. Layla says she thinks so, and then adds it's not a bad way to go out. And it's like, let's find out. And they keep going. They keep walking. And as they're walking, Layla realizes that they are now in a maze. And Steven's like, it's amazing. Dad jokes. And Layla says there are 6 paths. Steven also realizes that, and that there's 6 points. Then Layla finds bullet casings on the ground, and Layla asks what they would be shooting at. Steven then starts drawing in the sand on the slab, pointing out the whole structure is a symbol. Layla recognizes the symbol Steven drew as the Eye of Horus. And it's kind of like there's also like an eye reflected in light on the mirror. Or on the ceiling. Steven also points out that it's the royal protectionist symbol in the afterlife. And Layla says the comments about the resources needed to build this. Then she says that its final avatar was its final avatar was a pharaoh. And Steven's geeking out about this. And Layla asks if Steven thinks it's a map. And Steven says he thinks so. And the Eye of Horus is also the Eye of Mind, represented in the 6th sense, and there are 6 points. And also points out the different parts of the Eye of Horus and like what they mean. And then points out that a spiral is like a tongue. And Layla says that the avatar would be Amit's voice. And they continue following the path. And this is kind of where the episode starts getting a bit creepy, because Layla and Steven come across a room and it has like a slab and kind of off center of the room. And Layla recognizes some drawings that are on the ceiling, and they're Heka priests, judging from the masks and ceremonial stance, and they would have been entombed in there to protect the pharaoh. Steven asks what a Heka is, and Layla explains that they're sorcerers of the time and they must have been down there for centuries. And there's also some like mummies in the holes in the wall, and Layla says they must be the unlucky souls who cross their path. Steven says it's an oppressive send-off. And this is actually the moment where it takes where the episode takes a twist, because Steven starts freaking out because this slab Steven starts freaking out because the slab is covered with fresh blood, and there's also meaty bits which are just so disgusting. And then it gets weirder because Layla also finds some canopic jars, and some have like blood on them. And Layla says they should keep going. And as they go to leave, they see a fresh like drag trail of blood. So Steven says to wait, and he's just saying what he's seen, and he's seeing lots of clones and blood going that way, and suggests they find another way. And they do find another way up, and Steven goes up. Or more like Layla volunteers Steven to go up. And Steven's looking around, and it says that the ancient texts say that it should be bound to a new Shopti. Layla asks how it's looking. And Steven's looking at it like a partial mummy on a table, saying it looks amazing. And he also sees freshly filled canopic jars, snake skins, and talks about self-regeneration. Layla is like, Steven, the exit. Steven finds it and confirms they can go that way. But then we hear some gunfire, and Layla and Steven panic, and Layla realizes it's Harrow, and Steven asks what they're shooting at. Steven then tells Layla to hide, and we see a creepy figure coming in as Layla hides behind the altar. So I don't know if this is like one of the uh, the Hecka priests, because it's on like, is, or if it's just some creature. So he's dragging a man. Then it's like on all fours. It's creepy, y'all. And the thing is dragging a man in and then puts him on the slab and stabs him. He then takes a meaty bit out and puts it in the canopic jar. And Layla, he's trying to move position, but she accidentally knocks the jar over. So, and the creature is clicking, and I swear it sounds like clicking. And to all the gamers out there, you'll understand what I mean by this. It's the clicker that's clicking. Or no, the creature is kind of like clicking. And it sounds like the clickers from The Last of Us. And for those of you who don't know what the clickers are, they are basically zombies, but the cordyceps, cordyceps virus has just like covered their face, so they're blind, and so they click in order to essentially find prey. They are so freaking scary when you hear that clicking sound. And as soon as I heard that clicking, I was like, oh my god, this is The Last of Us all over again. And then the creature then jumps on the altar and is still like clicking, and then jumps and is hanging underneath the platform that Steven has climbed up on. It's really freaking scary. Layla then throws a jar against the wall, breaking it. Steven yells for Layla to run and he'll find her. Layla does, and Steven knocks the table over, thinking he squished the creature. You'll know why I say think in a second. And he runs away. So Layla is running, and she comes across a staircase hogging the wall with a very large hole. She calls out for Steven, but there's no response. Layla then lights a flare and drops it and sees it's a very long way down. Then Layla gets her Lara Croft on and shuffles across the wall on a ledge, and it's very tense because it's like crumbling underneath, and she goes to jump, and then like the other platform that she just jumped from like collapses. It's very tense. And then it gets so much worse. Then you see the creature go past this wall, and then you see like the hand just come out, and it's trying to grab Layla. And then she makes it through, has like her back to a hole in the wall. Oh my god, I'm even getting like thinking about it. The creature like wraps its arms around her, pulls her in, so you think Layla's done for, but then she gets thrown out, holding the hand of the creature. It leaps on her. Layla's dodging punches, and then she manages to grab a flare like a badass. She grabs a flare, shoves it in its head, lights it, like she's like punching it to light it, or like hitting a flare to light it, and then throws both of them off the cliff. But Layla's held on and climbs up, and she lays on the ground, getting her breath, and then screams. Which I think that's just from the adrenaline. Because you know that the adrenaline was flowing during that. Ugh. And then Layla spots Harrow from across the room. Then Steven, meanwhile, is freaking out over finding a pharaoh's tomb, recognizing that it's the tomb of one of the big pharaohs. And also the room has like water at the bottom of the floor and like stepping stones. Mark then appears in the water, saying, "So, you kissed her." Steven's like, "What are you gonna do? Try and drown us now?" Mark says he should. But Steven also told her the truth about why he's been pushing her away, and it was unexpected. Steven's like, "Yeah." He then admires the relics, and he's trying to like place the tomb, and he's like, "It's Macedonian." Wait, isn't that copyright? It is Macedonian. And he realizes that they just come across the tomb, the long lost tomb of Alexander the Great. And then we get a cool spinny shot of the tomb. And then Harrow tells Layla she handled the fight beautifully. Layla asks why all men like him have to be so condescending. We then hear more gunfire. Layla goes to leave, but Harrow reveals that he knew Layla's father used to call her his little scarab. And that his name was Abdullah el-Fali. I think that's how you say his name, at least. And that he was a renowned archaeologist in Egypt. Layla then goes back and looks at Harrow, and Harrow says he'd be proud of her if he knew that she was among the first to confirm for the world what he always believed, which is that Egyptian gods walked among them. He then says that the scales achieve their judgment by revealing to him moments of sin and pain, and Mark is in agony and in more pain than anyone could bear. Harrow says that Mark still has to tell her the truth. Layla points out that Harrow's obviously dying too, so just go ahead, the floor is his. Harrow tells Layla that he read his scales, and the scales don't lie. And we go back to Steven, where he's about to open the tomb, but he's like, "Oh, everything in me screaming not to open this thing." Mark's like, "Do you want Harrow to get to Amit first?" And Steven finally opens the tomb, revealing Alexander's mummy. But there's no Ushabti. Mark asks where it is. Steven points out that if you're gonna hide it, you're gonna hide it where like looters wouldn't look. Steven then realizes that Alexander was the voice of Amit. So he decides to like unwrap the face, apologizing, then he breaks open the jaw. He puts his hands down the throat. I'm gonna say this episode got weird, y'all. So, alright, now we're back to Arthur and Layla. And Arthur tells Layla that her father was murdered by mercenaries and no one knows who did it. Layla asks if he's saying Mark was one of them. Harrow's like, "You said it, what do you think?" As Layla goes to leave, Harrow says that Mark remembers everything that happened that day and everyone who died. But one man had stood out, a man with a fuchsia, I think that's how you say that, scarf details which are handmade and made by his daughter. And Layla's crying knowing it's her father. So Mark was there. And I'll get more into that in a bit. Layla kind of composes herself and asks Harrow if he's done. Tears are running down her face, and Harrow says she hopes she finds closure. As Layla leaves, Harrow yells to wake up, and goons come, basically. Back with Steven, we see Steven finding the Ushabti. Then Layla comes in and tells her they won. He's so excited and showing her the Ushabti. But Layla is pissed about time and seems like, "You alright, love?" Then Layla asks if he can hear her, and Steven thinks she's talking about Alexander. Layla asks what happened to her father, and she's talking to him. Steven's confused, but Layla's like, I'm talking to you, Mark! And it's like pushing him. And Mark fronts and says they have to go. And Layla says no and is arguing with Mark. Layla asks what happened to her father. Mark's telling her to listen to him, saying he'd tell her everything, but they had to go. Layla then asks if he killed Abdullah El Fowley. Mark insists. Mark says, "It's like, of course I didn't. Of course I didn't." Like insisting he didn't. And Layla says, "But you were there." Mark's like, "Yeah, I was." And Layla asks how her father died. Mark he's like, this is genuinely hurting him to say this. But Mark tells her that his partner got greedy, and it was the partner who had executed everyone at that dig site. So way back in episode 2, we see the 2 fake cops who had shown Steven the dig site, and everyone assumed that Mark had killed everyone at that dig site because they were all executed, basically. So it's going to be interesting if maybe that partner turns out to be the bad guy after all. Mark then reveals he tried to save Layla's father after revealing it was the partner that killed everyone at the dig site. Mark says that it was his partner who executed everyone at the dig site. He says he tried to save Layla's father, but he couldn't. Layla's like, no, but you're about to kill her right to him, and is hitting him, or shoving him more, is what it is. Mark says he did. And Mark then reveals that his partner shot him too, and he was supposed to know that night. He was supposed to die that night, and he should have. So it is that this is the incident probably that Khonshu resurrected Mark. Because he said that same thing to Steven. With, like, how he was supposed to die, but he didn't. And then Mark drops the bomb that he had tried to tell her since the moment they met. And then Layla drops another bomb on the audience as she's crying and, like, lets out a laugh as Mark's trying to say he didn't know. Or basically, like, he didn't know how to tell her, is what he's trying to say. And Layla realizes that the reason they met is because of Mark's guilty conscience, which probably means that Mark and Layla met after Layla's father died, and he was probably gonna tell her, like, that her father, or like what happened the night her father died, but he couldn't tell her the truth. And so then they must have, like, started dating and eventually got married after that. But that's how they met. Because Layla says that's the reason they met, and because he had a guilty conscience. And they hear goons coming, and so immediately they drop their shit, and Layla says that there must be another way out, and Mark tells her to find it, and he'll hold him off. Layla goes to hide, and Mark has the backpack off and by the tomb, and he grabs the golden axe that's in the tomb. And he comes in, the goons come in, lots of guns, and Harrow's in the middle of him holding the scarab out. And Harrow questions that if it's just Marc and the rest is sounds, and he puts the scarab away. Harrow tells Marc he remembers the first morning he woke up knowing Khonshu was gone, and the quiet was liberating. Harrow then says that Marc's a free man. He then offers Marc a choice, and right now he has a decision to make. Goons come closer to Marc, and oh god, sorry, Marc, he takes out one goon, takes out another, throws the axe at a third goon, before Harrow pulls a gun out of, I'm assuming, the waist of another goon who kind of falls into him, and then shoots Marc twice. And Layla is watching this whole thing go down. Layla's crying and holding her mouth, covering her mouth so she doesn't scream. Marc falls into the water, and Harrow says he can't save anyone who can't help themselves. And Marc falls into the water, but he's still there, but then it shows him falling deeper, deeper, and deeper into Fade into Black. And this is in this next bit. Yeah, so we get the Fade into the Black, and then we see it turns into this old-timey adventure Indiana Jones style movie. And we see a scene of this movie where a boy sets off a trap and a skeleton drops down, and a British adventurer assures the boy that the bones can't hurt him. The boy says at least they know what happened to Montalban. The adventure adds into anyone who chooses greed. So I'm wondering if Montalban is the name of the partner, and is the name of Marc's partner who got greedy. Because obviously, Montalban is dead, so now... oh, sorry. This bit's so confusing. So I'm wondering if we're going to see that in either this episode or if that's going to be the finale. And the British adventurer holds out a compass and assures the boy the treasure isn't gone, and then asks if there's anything unusual about the statue. So the compass must be the scarab, because the scarab essentially acts as a compass. And basically the British adventurer says that it's a statue of Koyazaki, I think is how you say it. Basically, it's the Aztec lunar god, which goes back to Khonshu being the Egyptian lunar god. And then the boy reveals his name is Dr. Stephen Grant, which is Stephen's name, is Stephen Grant. So... and it zooms out to show an all-white, colored psych ward. And we see, the living statue that Stephen would vent to, calling out bingo numbers. And we see another patient is playing with a Rubik's Cube, like Stephen did. Then we see one of the fake cop as a nurse, and asks Donna how she's doing. Donna, if you don't remember, is the bitch manager from the gift shop Stephen used to work at. He was a bitch to Stephen. And she's holding a scarab, saying she'd be happier if she called some O's. And then takes her meds, and we also hear a ticking clock. In last episode, Khonshu told Marc, tick-tock, Marc Spector, tick-tock. So, that's obviously a reference to that. And we see a cupcake cart being pushed by Beck, the cupcake truck that was used for the escape from the Alps back in episode 1. And Beck sees a picture drawn by another patient. It looks like Khonshu, or at least the head of Khonshu. Then we see a goldfish in a fishbowl. And then we see Mark's reflection of the glass. Then the guy who I'm pretty sure is the one who had just died, aka the one who got stabbed on the altar, died, tells Mark that the brakes are on and he's in his favorite spot. Mark is then handed a Turkish delight, and I did not realize they were Turkish delights, which is, I think, Layla's favorite snack from the last episode. Layla, and she's adjusting the postcards on the whiteboard, which are, I guess, the same postcards that were in the gift shop. And she tells him she changed the movie and it's been 5 times this week. Mark just moans because he's so sedated he can't talk. And he's a mess. Layla then comes over apologizing for startling him. Then she reveals he won the bingo card. Layla then promises to share the prize and leaves. Mark then calls for Steven, and when he gets up he falls down, revealing to be restrained by the ankle like Steven did for his nighttime routine. And that Steven did. And he also drops a Moon Knight action figure, which is really freaking weird. And then same nurse comes over and helps Mark back in his wheelchair. And then Mark's in an office and we hear Harem's voice tell him he's having a great deal of difficulty being able to differentiate what's real and what's in his head. And reveals he took a look at the film he brought. And the movie's called Tomb Buster. Harem makes a quip that it was fun to see if his old VHS player still worked. Harrow then asks how many times he's seen the movie, but he's still blurry. Harrow then says he likes the villain and quotes the movie saying no tree can descend to the light of heaven if it doesn't descend to the depths of hell. Which, I don't know if that's supposed to be a reference to hitting rock bottom. You can't, until you've hit rock bottom, you can't ascend. Or if it's supposed to be about redemption a bit, or redemption or repentance, if that's a reference to Mark, because we know Mark I think Mark is genuinely trying to want to improve or work out his relationship with Layla, but he knows that he screwed up, and he wants, I think he does want, and I don't know, actually, it's kind of it's weird to think about this, because I honestly don't even know what's going on in this sequence. Harrow comments it's a good line, and the plot makes a meal out of a lunar god, and asks if Mark said he worked for one. And we slowly see an image of the Alps, which is where they were in episode 1 for a time. Harrow asks what Mark makes out of that similarity, given the production value of the film. He cannot imagine other people have seen the film, and asks if it's a coincidence. Mark slowly comes out of it as Harrow reveals he's sedated because of his behavior, but it'll wear off soon. Harrow then explains that they don't live in a material world, they live in a psychic world, and they're only able to make indirect references about the nature of reality. Harrow then uses the example of a pen, saying to him it's a writing utensil, but to his dog it's a chew toy. Both are right, but it's about the context and perspective. So, psychic world. I honestly, I don't know what that's supposed to mean. there's just, there's just so much, like, in this episode. Harrow continues asking Mark for an honest assessment of his situation. Mark then sees shoes that look like the ones Harrow wears, and after a bug lands on him, he's repeating, like, everything reminds me. And Harrow asks if it reminds him of Steven. Mark asks if he knows Steven. Harrow says he knows Steven, but he wanted to talk to Mark. And he's noticed a pattern developing every time he asks direct questions. He gets triggered and overwhelmed, which is normal, as many people, when asked to link into their innermost experiences, the nucleus of the personality, and close their eyes. It's understandable. Harrow then tells Mark he can't help him if he doesn't help himself. And then that causes Mark to kind of snap out of it and realizes Harrow's the one who shot him, and nurses try to get him, but Mark escapes by biting and then hiding. And so he goes into a room, shuts the door, everyone moves past. Once Mark is in the clear, he sees the sarcophagus banging like someone's inside. Mark opens it up, and it's Steven. And they hug. And it's adorable. And I found out that Oscar Isaac's brother is the body double, because I actually do kind of know how this works. For those of you who don't know, when you're shooting a scene that has the same actor multiple times in a scene, what they'll do is they'll have body doubles. Like, they have the act, essentially they shoot the scene 3 times, or they shoot the scene however many times they need to. So in this case, 2 people, or there's 2 Oscar Isaacs in 1 shot. So what they do is they'll have a body double, and they have one actor. So in this case, they'll have Oscar Isaac perform his line as Mark, and have the body double do the line as Steven, and then they'll do the same shot again, but this time Oscar will be saying Steven's lines as Steven, and the body double will be saying Mark's lines, and then they superimpose the image. Though in this case, for like just this hug, they probably just, they had the camera shot so you only saw the back of Mark, but which is probably just to hide the fact that it was his brother, so they can save a bit on CG. But the rest of the scene, you can see that both of them. So anyways, little movie magic with Kaylee there. So they both are standing there confused. Steven asks how this is possible. Mark said he doesn't know. He then asked Steven what the last thing he remembered was. Steven remembers that Harrow shot them. Harrow gets excited that he remembers, and then tells him they have to leave. As they go to leave, we see another sarcophagus leaning against, or it's in a room, and it's banging like someone's trying to get out, and that's another hint of a 3rd altar, I'm pretty sure, who I think we'll meet in the next episode, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be Jake Lockley. But then a large shadow is outside the door. Mark and Steven both stop, and the doors open, revealing this hippo goddess, I think is who it is. I forget her name, but I know it's a goddess, and I know her name starts with the T. And she's just like, "Hi." And then Marc and Steven scream. And that's actually how the episode ends. I told you this episode was weird, y'all. Okay, so I have some final notes. So, as I kind of specified before, Marc was there when Layla's father died, and I thought that it was supposed to be when Layla was young, but it must have been something a bit more recent. No, I say recent, but I think they talk about, Layla says it's been 10 years since she's been back in Cairo. So, when I say recent, I'm talking about when Layla was an adult, not when she was a child like I had originally thought. So, which kind of does change what I suspected happened now that we know about the partner and that Marc was there. So, I don't know if Layla was on like a different dig or if she was, some reason was not there. And Marc must have been there. Partner got greedy and then shot everyone and then killed everyone and then shot Marc. And he probably did die, but somehow Khonshu was able to resurrect him. I don't know if it was because of the scarab or if they were dealing with another artifact. Or if they were dealing with another artifact that had to do with Khonshu. But somehow Khonshu showed up and resurrected Marc. And I think Marc, because he was the only survivor as far as we know of what happened, Marc probably found Layla and told her that, or she just found out through police probably, that her father had died, and then Marc approached her wanting to tell her the truth. I don't know if it was because he saw how upset she was, or if he just couldn't bear to put on more agony on Layla, so he probably just introduced himself as another archaeologist, and they went, and so they decided to like work together, and then that's how they ended up falling in love and then getting married. But then something happened with the scarab, and because Marc still had it. So the question is, why does Marc have it and not Layla? If it was Layla's father's scarab, because she obviously knows what it is. So, and like she tells Steven when she thinks he's Marc that like it's the thing they fought side by side for. So I don't know exactly what the timeline here is. And continuing on with my final notes, Layla's is badass as always, and I loved just like her first thing she did when she saw the goons coming was, because I think she knew that they wouldn't just straight up shoot Steven, but then she also had to like take care of the truck, so she used the flare, got them away from Steven, threw the flare in the truck and lit it up. And also like the sheer like confidence that she has, though, that like she doesn't need protection. She needs honesty. And which I think is why could be part of the reason maybe that Marc and Layla had sort of become estranged, is that Marc's it's very clear that Marc's instinct is protection, which and so is Layla's, as we've seen. Because as soon as Layla got that phone call, she traced the phone call and found, I use Marc in quotations, and then, like, immediately, even with Steven, she makes sure, she treated Steven with kindness, even though she was still, like, confused about the situation when they were back at the, in that attic. She, even though, like, she is confused about, like, the whole Marc having another altar and having that other altar front, she still, like, recognized that Steven was scared and was about to have a panic attack, so she backed off and was willing to find another way, even though she had no idea what was going on. And even in this episode, Steven was scared to go down the path with the blood and bones. So, alright, we'll find another way. So, yeah. So, it's interesting when you have two people whose first instincts are to protect each other, but also don't need protection. Which is exactly what's going on here with Marc and Steven. With Marc and Layla, sorry. I did not have coffee this morning, that's why. Alright, which is that interesting to see that between Layla and Marc, how they both clearly care about each other still. But Layla not wanting honesty, but Marc being unable to be honest for fear of rejection is what it comes down to, if you think about it, because Harrow basically said that's why Marc won't tell Layla the truth, because if he does, he thinks she'll see him as a man who is unworthy of love. So I'm curious to see how that sort of resolves, if how that's going to reserve. Because now we have this interesting dynamic with Layla being both in love with Marc and Steven, and Marc being in love with Layla, and Steven being in love with Layla. So that's gonna be interesting, because Marc and Steven, they're kind of not the same person, but like they share a body, so it's kind of weird. And kind of complicated, but I'm assuming, or my general rule of thumb is, if you can have multiples in a relationship as long as there's communication. So, and right now, communication is, for at least Marc, Layla, and Steven, communication is not the best thing at the moment. But it would be interesting to see if by the end of the episode, or if by the end of this season, sorry, if that gets sort of, if they do, like, have a conversation about that. Because that would need to happen. And just again, this is one of the creepiest and twistiest episodes yet, with the Heka priest, and then with the clicking will forever haunt me, and then like I don't even know where they're at the end, because I don't know if Marc and Steven are in like an afterlife, or like a void thing, the void thing mentioned in the last episode where like the gods are, because there was like the goddess at the end who showed up, and apparently by what I have seen, that is like a goddess of resurrection. So it is possible that she's there to resurrect Marc, but it's also like, why would it look like a psych ward, or if this is like a supernatural kind of thing where like heaven is like your dream, and which is interesting because Marc and Steven are now in a psych ward, which is usually, but I think though the psych ward is because both Marc and, because not only did Steven talk about how he was gonna like take the bag of illegal stuff that he found in the storage unit and turn himself into the police, where they would admit him to a psych ward and give him so many pills he's not going to see Marc. And then Marc said he also needed help. So I'm wondering if that's why there's the psych ward. But I don't know what exactly the place is, because there's all these like references in the psych ward to things we have seen earlier with the Rubik's Cube and the cupcakes and Donna and the Scarab. Even seeing Arthur and then Layla, and seeing like faces that we've seen previously. I don't know what it all means. And episode, if this is how episode 4 is, I can't wait to see what craziness episode 5 is going to be, because y'all aren't ready for what that's going to turn into, because okay, so I am going to end the episode there. Thank you so much for listening. To learn more about NAFCO, you can head over to nafco.org and follow us on our socials. Link to the website, where you can learn, link on socials, which are linked on the website, and the link to the NAFCO website will be in the episode description if you want to learn more about our sponsors or to donate to NAFCO. And also my website will be in the episode description as well. So the next episode that is going to come out, I am going to be talking about the second episode of Leverage, called The Homecoming Job with Alex. It's going to be fun, and I can't wait to talk about it. So, I'll see you all in the next episode.